Hello, everyone. This is Tommy at World at War Comics, and today we have a very special guest. But before we get into that, please remember this podcast does not work unless you subscribe, unless you hit that notification bell. Please do that for us. It really helps us with the algorithm, and it also allows you to know when all of these great interviews are being done. So hit that subscribe button for us and help us be successful. Also, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is sponsored by Cien Chilies, the best hot sauce that you could buy. Go to CIENCHILES.com and use comics at checkout, and you will save 15% off your total bill. I'm telling you, the Thai bird, fantastic. The jalapeno, the habanero, you can't go wrong. I even have a mustard seed sauce. All right. Also, this podcast is brought to you by Comic Crusaders. I'm a writer for Comic Crusaders. You should be reading Comic Crusaders. If you want someone who's going to give you the best reviews on comics, comic book movies, music, go to comiccrusaders.com. All right, without further ado, today's guest, very special guest today, is the extraordinary artist, Justin Greenwood. He is a co-creator for Torrent with Marc Guggenheim. Check that out. It was a 5-part series. I actually fell in love with this, but man, Justin has been involved in a lot of other amazing things like The Last Siege, The Old Guard, Crone, Lazarus, Stumptown. He has been involved in a lot of amazing artwork for a lot of amazing comic book companies, and he has partnered with Marc on a couple of projects. This is their new one. As a co-creator of Torrent, I'm really looking forward to talking to him and bringing you this story. It's an amazing story. If you haven't read Torrent, please get it. It came out this year, and it is fantastic. All right, without further ado, here's Justin and I. Thanks, everybody. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. Today, my special guest, Mr. Justin Greenwood. Justin, thanks for joining us today. Hope you're doing well, my friend.
Thanks for having me, man. I feel like we've been talking about this for a minute. It's nice to
Oh,
formally
yeah.
get together and chat,
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I mean, I reached out to you mainly because of Torrent, but I mean, you have such an amazing career. I thought maybe we could start from the very beginning of how you got into all this and your passion, and then maybe we could
Sure.
go over some of your other projects, and then we can end with Torrent or whatever else you're working on right now. Is that all
No,
right?
no, that's fine. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Awesome. So, where did this passion for comics begin? Was it like most of us as a kid running to your local comic book store or drugstore and picking up a comic?
Yeah. Well, we didn't have a comic store when I was little in
Mhm.
town. And when one showed up, I was pumped. But my bridge into comics was my dad is an artist, and he did custom paint and pinstriping, and he was an awesome storyteller too. So I kind of had a love for both of those things really early on.
Yeah.
And he was really into like car magazines. I don't know. I feel like magazine culture has kind of gone away, which is a bummer. But when I was growing
Yeah.
up, our household, like our table was just full of like
Yeah, me
biker
too.
magazines and car magazines and like lowrider and like all these different ones, like racing
Yeah.
magazines, really into racing. And so it was a real regular trip in our household. We grew up in the East Bay, and we
Hmm.
would drive over to this shop on B Street in Hayward, and it was a full magazine store. There was one in Oakland, Delaware. There was
That's
this one.
crazy.
There were a handful of
Yeah.
them, and my dad wanted time to look through the magazine, so he just parked us in front of the comics, and
Yeah.
because we liked looking at the art. And I really feel like when I think back to where my love for comics started, it really started with just sitting down there and just poring over whatever was out. It's not
Yeah.
like you understood like schedules. You didn't recognize that books came out on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
You're too little. You're just when you
Yeah.
showed up, there were new books. You were pumped, and then you
Yeah.
just read as much as you could in that 20-minute window, and then I usually could talk him into buying at least one or two books. Uh,
Yeah.
and I grew up a real Marvel kid.
Yeah.
I loved Wolverine. I loved X-Men, and then eventually, when I got old enough, um, Crush Comics started in Castro Valley. Now there's like
That's
25, 30
right.
years, maybe more than that. And I remember going in there and being like, "Whoa, it's a place that's just dedicated to comics. Like this is so awesome." And I would spend all the money I had getting
Yeah.
comics and building my little collection.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Do you still
so yeah,
have
I
a lot of
started.
that today?
Yeah, a lot of. I'll bet you I have all of it. To be honest,
Nice, man.
I have a bunch of old long boxes, and if I went really digging around, I'd find a section that was just super old. It would be like Sectar comics, and it would be I don't know, Spider-Man versus GI Joe. Remember there's like a GI Joe versus Transformers, like all these like.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they were all the same properties I was watching as a kid. I'm in my
Yep.
mid 40s. I watched all these cartoons, so
Yeah.
I had the comic versions of a lot of that stuff too, and I was really into it. But
Yeah,
you
when the
know,
Transformer movie came out, I was really I think, affected emotionally
Yeah.
and psychologically when Optimus Prime died. I think that's the one thing that I remember that really probably damaged me for a long time.
Hey, spoilers, man. I know, and you know what? It was such a intense, and the GI Joe movie too. I don't know,
Oh
they
yeah,
just felt big because you felt like the thing you love is getting this whole nother run, a
yeah,
whole other version of it, and it was awesome. And then when I found the
yeah,
comics, I was like, oh, the comics are like almost mature versions of this. Like they were treated a little more because they were hiring legit writers, comic writers, to work on this
yeah,
stuff, and
yeah,
the art was
absolutely.
generally pretty good. So um, I think for a long time I thought like, oh, I like to draw and I love comic books. Maybe someday I'll draw. Like I want to draw I want to draw some X-Men book or a
Yeah,
Wolverine book for sure.
yeah.
And then around the time I was like 14 or 15, we were going to my first WonderCon. My dad took me to a convention, and it was Oakland then. It wasn't even San Francisco. It was far enough
Yeah.
back to where it was Oakland.
Really? Was it pretty
And
small at that time?
yeah, much smaller than like what it is now for sure.
Yeah.
And it happened to be the same WonderCon that Image kicked off. Image, like all the Image creators were there,
Like
and it was their
93,
first.
somewhere around there, 94, 92.
Yeah, and I was
Yeah.
reading those, I was reading those X books, I was reading that stuff. So for me, I was like, oh my god, like these guys in my mind, they were the rock stars, and
Yeah.
were all, the central message was make your own thing and tell your own story. And like I didn't understand like ownership or any of that stuff. I just never
Yeah.
thought about it, and so I don't know. It really changed my perspective. I kind of went from that convention from being like, oh, I want to draw X books someday to trying to making my own stories and working for Image or working with Image someday. And
Yeah.
luckily, it worked out, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think it worked out.
Yeah, yeah.
You've done a few things with the
I mean,
image, so
so far so good.
yeah,
Yeah,
so far so good. I think you're doing all right.
yeah. Um,
What
I'll
was
go
the
ahead. Go ahead.
first project professionally that you started on, Justin?
Yeah, the first thing I worked on, and this is actually kind of ties back into Torrent.
Mm-hmm.
I went to art school sometime later, and
Yep.
I said to myself, okay, I'm going to start with comics. I felt like I want to draw something, and comics is
Yeah.
the thing I like the most, and so I'm going to focus on that first and give myself a little time to kind of understand that industry better and get out there, and hopefully I'll start there and see if I can make it work.
Yeah.
And I used to take my portfolio around, and then again, like to WonderCon, but at that point it's in San Francisco or whatever local shows I could make it to, and try and get feedback and see about getting someone to look at it and hire me. And on one
Yeah.
of those trips, I met James Lucas Jones, who was with Oni-Press for a long time.
Mm.
And I pitched them something that I felt like would fit. And he said, we're not going to do this book. Like we have our hands full with lots of stuff, but your art does fit things we have on our desk right now. I think maybe let's stay in contact and see if we can find something that is a good fit for you.
Yeah.
And that project ended up being Resurrection. Probably a year later or so, I was drawing the relaunch of Resurrection, which was with
Wow.
Marc Guggenheim.
Yeah.
The editor had paired us together, and it was Oni's first. If I remember, it's the first color series they did ongoing because they had been black and white.
Yeah.
It was finally at a time when like printing color books was more reasonably priced, and you could actually, even a company that was a little smaller could do like a full run of color ongoing series.
Nice.
And so that was my very first project. And fortunately, all these years later, Marc and I have stayed in contact, and we've worked on
Yeah.
things off and on together. And this was the newest thing we did together. This Torrent.
Yeah, I saw that you've done a couple things. You co-created a couple things with him. Do you know off the top of your head how many different projects that you've done together that have made it to print through some of these publishers?
Yeah, this is our third book together, our third
A third
series together.
third series.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's
And I
awesome.
imagine it won't be the last one. We talk about. I talk to him with some frequency, and we love working together. So I would say it's likely we'll end up doing something else down the road too.
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny when you're starting out, you're just hopeful to get
Hmm.
work, and you'll take whatever you can get to get started and get
Yeah,
something under your
absolutely.
belt, and you're just kind of banking on editors placing you with the right teams. But
Yeah.
I've been really lucky, man. As time has gone on, you start to get to know people and make
Mhm.
connections and relationships with folks.
Yeah.
And at this stage, so many of the things I work on are creator owned, and it comes from teaming up with people I know and saying we should do something together. And fortunately, I'm just blessed to know a lot of people with great ideas, and it's just my career has kind of taken a turn from kind of waiting to hear about the next thing to kind of finding it on our own and building it ourselves, which is a pretty nice way to go.
Yeah. It sounds like it. Sounds
Yeah.
awesome. When did you get hooked up with Image? What was the first title that you did with Image? Because you've done
Uh,
about five or six things with Image now, right? Whether on the art side or creator owned, right?
yeah. The first thing I did was the Fuse. So I had
Oh,
worked
okay.
on Wasteland with Anthony Johnson at
Yeah.
Oni-Press also.
Mm-hmm.
And we enjoyed working together so much that at one point he reached out and said, "Hey, I have this series, this sci-fi book. It's like a sci-fi crime thing. I think you'd be a good fit for it. And if you're interested in it, it's already been greenlit. Like I've talked to Image about it; they're ready for it. I think they would love to have you on. What do you think about it?" And I thought the premise was super strong. It was
Yeah.
I think the way he pitched it was like homicide set on Battlestar Galactica, which I thought
Yeah.
was pretty cool. I couldn't get into Battlestar Galactica. It was my only hang up. I know it is a fan favorite for so many people,
Yeah.
but never got into that series. But regardless, I love the premise. I love the
Yeah.
idea. It's
Yeah.
basically a crime procedural, but on a space station.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the first thing we did. It ran 4 volumes. Actually, it was a totally awesome book. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's crazy because in my mind it does not that long ago, but I mean, I'll
Mhm.
bet you we wrapped it up at least 8 or 9 years ago now, which is
That's
crazy.
crazy.
7 8 years ago. It's
Time
wild.
flies, huh? Was it
Yeah.
because you grew up, you mentioned the story about going to WonderCon and seeing Image and being kind of affected and how you perceive comics moving forward, right? You don't have to just hope that the big two notice your art. Now you could be a
Yeah.
creator. Like, what was that feeling of doing something for the first time with Image, knowing that you grew up a big fan of them?
Oh, I mean, it's just a really gratifying.
Yeah,
It could have been anything, right? It's not like
yeah,
one publisher is necessarily better than the other. They all
for
offer
sure.
different things. But the thing that you look at in your mind as the apex when you're
Yeah,
young stays the apex forever, kind of,
for sure. Yeah,
no
yeah,
matter who comes along. And so in my mind, that was like, that's the big time. You get an Image book on your belt, you really have done something. You can say you did something substantial in comics. And I
yeah.
still really feel that way. They're an incredible company. I like working with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to support. For one thing, they've been super supportive of our books, but broadly
Yeah,
speaking, they support interesting projects. And I feel like if they like it,
yeah.
we're a long ways towards getting something other people are going to like too.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's incredible, man. You know, the as a writer, right, you're kind of limited to how much verbiage you could put in a comic book. So you really depend on the art to tell a large portion of that story, right? And so that kind of dance or whatever you want to call it between a writer and an artist is extremely important because a story is being told equally, I think, in most cases.
Yeah.
And it seems like you just mentioned that you've been very fortunate to be connected to others that have really worked out. Can you kind of speak to that feeling of working with a really good artist or writer as an
Good ride.
artist and
Yeah.
that kind of back and forth and what
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
looks
Yeah.
like?
Yep. I often think of that kind of collaboration is a little bit like translating. I'll get a
Mm,
script and at the beginning, when I start out, I'm just trying to get it exactly how it was asked for.
yeah.
But as time has gone on, you have your own point of view and your own perspective, and hopefully that's why people chose to work with you in the first place. Is you offer
Yeah.
something unique also,
Hmm.
and and likewise, you want to work with writers who offer something unique, and you don't want people who are doing things that you think are interesting, or else you would probably be bored to tears after a while.
Yeah, for sure.
But I usually try and boil something down to really think about what the point is, and then how
Yeah.
to make that point as effectively as possible. And sometimes that means changing things a bit. Sometimes it
Hmm.
means keeping it exactly the same. And all writers are different, right? I mean, some
Yeah.
writers are very visually driven, especially ones who were artists at one time.
Hmm.
They have a much stronger sense of what they think something should look like.
Yeah.
So I have writers who I work with who are they really just focus on the emotional content and they're not worried
Yeah.
about the visual. They just trust you to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Relationship can change. It just depends on who I'm working with and what the project is.
Hmm.
But at this stage, as an artist, I feel like that's the thing you bring is that part of that storytelling is
Yeah.
part of I think hopefully is my strength as a storyteller is offering a version of that really when they look at it they say oh man this makes this point so well like you hit that
Yeah.
beat so hard and it's a little
Hmm.
bit like music you're building a rhythm and you're building a
Yeah.
tempo and reading the script and saying how do I do that visually how can I this feeling I'm supposed to feel maybe that feeling is fear or tension how do I build that tension in a way to where not only do I get that tension but then it pays off too. um,
Yeah. Man.
and that's the fun of it. That's the challenge of it. I
Yeah.
actually love that part. And I hear people sometimes lament about having to do breakdowns,
Mm.
but for me, that's the real fun. Is like the challenge of really bringing something and trying to make the most out of it.
Yeah.
I love that part. You know,
Yeah. Is there a lot of communication back and forth during that process? Or do you just get like the whole script and then you just start page by page going through that and the trust is there? I mean, you already have such a great career. I assume that the trust is just there and you just do your thing. But is there still a lot of back and forth in between?
Yeah, and it depends on the relationship I have with the creative team. But I mean, take Torrent
Yeah.
as an example. You know, I ran into Mark in San Diego. I think it was the last San Diego before like COVID shut down.
Okay.
And we said, dude, it's so good. You know, it's good to hang out. We were hanging out. We said, we should do something again. You know, and so sometime later, Mark sent me like a bunch of ideas, and they were just log lines. You know, basically like one or two sentences, maybe 8 or 10 of them. And I ran through them, and I thought, oh, you know, this one with Torrent is pretty strong. Like I want to do a superhero. I have not in all this time I've been drawing comics, I have not done superheroes, and I thought this
Yeah.
would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I thought the premise was awesome. I love the idea of doing this. I feel like the expression like a gritty take on superheroes is so generally overdone. I
Yeah.
don't believe that true of this book, but it was true that the
Yeah.
book has a sort of a violent streak. I mean, it's
For
a
sure.
story about it's a tough story about somebody who is desperate, and
Yeah.
I like that. I like it. It kind of utilizes aspects of comics I've done in the past, but taking a fresh perspective on it.
For
And
sure.
so I liked it. And so I sent it back to him. I said, I would like to do this one is the one I get most excited about.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he then goes to work on building a little outline of that. But it's like a few pages, you know, just like a broad strokes breakdown of what that story would look like the way he intended it.
Yeah.
And then I'll review that and say, oh, this is awesome. What if we did this? You know, I kick some ideas back and forth. But
Yeah.
if you love it at that stage, you're probably going to love it all the
Yeah.
way through. I feel like.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you dig in. And so from that interaction, I'll do sketches maybe, or I'll start breaking stuff down and kind of giving my take on it. Here's what I think would be cool. What do you think about this? And you know, it is a lot of back and forth at that point.
Yeah.
But once it's settled, then we do the thing that we both know how to do, right? He goes and
Yeah.
he builds scripts out of it, and he's sending them along, and I'm working on the art, and then we talk about what colorists would like. We brought in Rico Renzi, and we brought in Keith Wood. I mean, the thing about this project is it's people I know really well, and it's just
Yeah.
really exciting to get to work with them, and we get
Yeah.
this chance to tell a cool story, and you can have faith in every part in that team that they're going to bring their best work, and that's a lot of fun because it makes you excited for everything. Every issue you work on is like a new experience, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Can you also kind of speak to character development and how involved an artist is from a character development standpoint? Because I assume as a writer, right, there's a kind of a rough picture of like who Michelle would be, but the artist is really coming in and say, okay, she should really look like this, and her uniform should look like this, whatever that looks like. Can you kind of talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably different for every partnership, but like, I mean, like, I don't know. In the case of Torn, as an example, I think originally it was the like Michelle was Michael. I think it was like a guy
Oh,
originally,
okay.
the original premise of the story. And as we talked about it, it just seemed like this would be so much more interesting if she was a mom. If it was a mom, I just think
Yeah,
that's a way more interesting take on that. And so did Mark. But you know, I don't know. It's hard to pick out a conversation and say, oh, it's like this. This was the
yeah,
thing that changes, or this. It's just kind of a back and forth that develops.
yeah, yeah.
And so you know, when I read a script, I have a feeling about how I think that should look, and
Mm-hmm.
then I present that, and then you know, I'll bet you, like in the case of her costume, whatever, there's probably 15 versions of that are rough, small. They're really small and simple drawings.
Sure.
Um, and then we go, which one of these do you like, or do you feel like this is closer to what you had in mind, or you know, we just kind of kick it around until we find the version that seems to be the best fit, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you have that open dynamic with your collaborators, and generally we do, that
Mm-hmm.
process is pretty seamless. It's just sort of
Yeah,
like spitballing, you know, but with
yeah.
fun, you know.
It sounds fun too.
Yeah, it is fun. I mean, it's
Yeah,
super fun. That's the
yeah.
thing that's crazy about this job. Yesterday I went to my wife. My wife is a teacher, and they
Uh,
asked if I could come in and talk to the kids about like being an artist and what that's like. And you know, you presenting it like it's a very formal thing, but it's fun. I think the
yeah,
problem in comics is when you lose sight of that, and
yeah.
that's when stuff starts to feel stale and
Mm-hmm.
kind of dry. But I don't know, man. If it's not fun, I don't know why you would choose comics in the first place. It's such a crazy industry. It's like a
Yeah,
little cottage industry where you get to tell stories a really certain to a
yeah,
really specific crowd.
yeah,
They never generally get like it's not like television or movies where the audience is gigantic. You're just really speaking to people who also love comics, and
mm-hmm.
if you're really into it, it really shows. I think, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can see when it doesn't too. I mean, with respect to folks, I mean, sometimes you see something
Sure.
and you're just like, oh my god, I don't know what is going on here. Like it just feels like no one is having fun. They're doing the
Yeah.
job, but they're just not. It just doesn't look enjoyable, you know.
And I think again, you wouldn't know for sure as a reader, but I think as a reader you could tell as well.
I think so
I
too.
know as a reader I could tell immediately if the artist and the writer don't have a lot of collaboration,
Yeah,
because the writer will be saying something and you could see the artist was trying to do that, but maybe the artist didn't fully understand what the writer was trying to portray. And so
Yeah.
they did what their best to their ability, but because there was no communication, they didn't iron out some of the specifics. And as a reader, you're reading, you're like, it's just like they're out of sync
Yeah,
somehow, right?
you just feel it. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
you just sense it.
it's a lot like music. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes you see something that's technically so proficient and
yeah,
you're like, wow, look at the ability of these people, but you just don't care. It doesn't feel like
yeah,
there's a point.
yeah,
And then sometimes you hear something that's rough and sloppy, but what you get out of it is an emotional connection that you can't, maybe fits that song or whatever so perfectly that um, it really pays off in a way you wouldn't expect. And I think that's true specifically with creator-owned comics. And
yeah,
I like big two stuff also for sure.
yeah,
But the reason I work in creator-owned comics, I like that connection. I like those
yeah.
relationships, and I think it shows a lot of times.
Yeah, no, fully agree.
Yeah,
And you made a comment that it might have started off as Michael and then it became Michelle. And I could tell you if it was Michael, I'm not sure some of the emotional effects of reading the comic book would have came out the way they did. But to your point, as a mom going through some of those things and experiencing, like we don't want to give the
yeah,
whole premise of the book away, but
sure.
it's incredible because man, when I was reading it, it touches on so many different emotions, excitement. Like you said, it does get pretty graphic from the fighting scenes and the blood and stuff like that, which is I absolutely love. So
Yeah,
I got that out of my system reading this. But then there's this emotional side too, because there's a family involved that's been affected in a negative way. And
yeah.
to see that from a mother's perspective, I thought was really cool too.
Awesome. Yeah, I did too. And that stuff just happens organically, but it gets back to that same thought. What is the point of this book? What are we trying to do? What's the best
Yeah.
way to get there? And
Yeah.
hopefully you're on it. And I generally am on teams where we're all on the same page with that. And I
Yeah.
think also some of that style choice, like in this book in particular, because there has that it does have that violence. I felt like using a little more open line animated style, like Rico's doing like a more like an animated style in the color. It
Yeah.
makes this stuff feel more graphic to me because it feels playful at first, and then it's not, and then suddenly it's like really not playful.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I just think it just pays off. It was just really fun to try and pull that off.
Yeah, yeah. No, it came through and that's why I originally, like I said before we started recording, reached out to you because man, I just loved it. And I'm
Thanks.
hopeful that somehow this will continue down the future. We'll see what happens. But
It could.
what was
It's
his
something
name?
we've talked about for
Slipstream?
sure. What's that?
Slipstream, I think, was one of the characters at the
Yep.
end, which, hopefully maybe could play a part. But yeah, it was just so awesome, man.
Yeah, man. We do have plans for other stories, especially. I mean, the world is big.
Yeah.
Even if the story didn't directly pick up, you could do lots of stuff with these characters. I mean, that was the
Yeah.
fun of creating it. And I don't know, growing up, like loving superhero books as a kid, that was
Yeah.
sort of that unexpected quality in comics is what made it fun. From week to week or from month to month, you never knew what you were going
Yeah.
to get. And I feel like that's that energy we try to capture in this book too. That's
Yeah.
what I enjoyed about those books growing up.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Because you made that comment, and it is kind of funny after you said it, that growing up a superhero fan and not really getting an opportunity to do a superhero book until
Mm-hmm.
Torrent. I mean, have you considered like why it didn't happen sooner, or were you trying to get into like a superhero book? It just didn't happen, but was that kind of on your bucket list? Like, eventually, I want to do this.
Well, I felt like I'll get to it. I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah,
if I'm able to stick around long enough. Like who knows? But although I did grow up on superhero books, I now as an adult check
yeah.
out tons of stuff. Right? Like I love
Oh
crime
yeah,
things. I like I do like sci-fi a lot. I like
me
fantasy
too.
sometimes, and
Yeah,
so as projects come along, I'm not really
yeah.
hung up on doing superheroes so much as just telling what I think are really cool stories.
That's a good point. Yeah,
And then when you get to that, and then in this case, we get to tell a cool story that's in a superhero world. It's like, oh, that's cool. This is on
yeah,
my checklist of things I'd love to do. This will
yeah,
be awesome. And I think I ended up drawing an issue of Batman like right around the time this came out or just before. Like I ended up with that opportunity, but it
yeah,
wasn't mine. And as much as I
yeah,
like it, and I do enjoy drawing stuff like that, it's really cool, especially like legacy characters who have such a do
yeah,
have a really big audience. It's really fun to work with that. But
for sure. Yeah,
my heart's in the things that we get to make up. And I guess,
yeah,
maybe I'm just a little spoiled, but if I can continue to do that, I'll probably try and do that as long as I can.
yeah, yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I always think about being a writer on like Batman or Superman, which would be fantastic because I love those characters.
Yeah.
But then you start to think like you might have a really unique story, but it doesn't fit within the canon of that character. So you
Yeah.
can't tell that story, right? And so there are limits to what you can't. At least there should be, because you have
Well,
this
they're usually
canon, right?
some parameters, right? And
Yeah, some,
and the
yeah,
thing is, it's an established character, so regardless of what
yep,
anybody's telling you to do, you still have to fit within the parameters of what's expected of that character too. As long as you can justify
yeah,
it in a way, you can twist that.
yeah.
I mean, I guess a good example of that is my friend Tony Fleece hit me up because he was writing an
Mm.
Army of Darkness book. He
Tony,
said, "Hey,
yeah,
do
he's
you
such
want
a
to?"
good guy.
He's awesome. He's awesome. And so he said, "You want to do? Would you be interested in doing? I'm writing a sequel of
Uh-huh.
Army of Darkness for Dynamite right now. Would you be interested in drawing it?" And like, it's exactly the same thing. So I get to work with a friend, and we're going to
Yeah,
treat it like a creator-owned book. But it is, we do have to answer to a licensor if they don't like something. We'll
yeah,
have to change it. But
yeah.
at this point, we're 2/3. I'm like 4 issues into. I'm starting on the fifth issue, and we're cooking. And
That's awesome.
we don't really get much pushback on the ideas. And a part of that is because Tony knows who that character is and just
Yeah.
is nailing the writing. So
Yeah. Well, him and Tim Seeley have put together with Local Man is just
mm-hmm.
so good, man.
It's great. Yeah.
So good. I love that storyline. And yeah, I got to get him on the show somehow. But I had Tim Seeley on, and we nerded out because I think all of us are about the same age. So we talked before and after the show about He-Man, G.I. Joe,
Uh-huh.
Transformers. It
Well,
was just
and
fun.
Tim
And
Seeley's really living in the heart of that, right? Like he's written
oh,
all those properties. Like it's not just that
yeah.
he likes that stuff, but he's
I think he had a
spent time with all those.
checklist of, I need to write something for G.I. Joe, which he's already done. I need to
Yeah.
do Transformers. Now he's doing He-Man, so he's been able to write that off. So yeah, it's been fun to kind of see him be able to fulfill these lifelong dreams of either doing art or writing
Yeah.
for some of these IPs, and it's been pretty cool, man.
Yeah, he's been on fire. I mean, that dude writes so much stuff. I can't believe it.
I
I feel
know.
like Tony writes a lot of stuff, and Tim Seeley is just out of control, man. That
He's
man is.
everywhere. I told him that. I said, Tim, I could look at an independent shelf and you probably write 30% of it. Like, how do you find time for that? Yeah, that's probably exaggeration, but I was like, dude, you are out of
I,
control. Because
I'd
I'm
like
not
to
sure
know
if
the
that's
answer.
good or not.
Well, I mean, it's good for him. He's killing it. But
Yeah.
I'd like to know the answer too. Like he really, I don't know. It's hard. I mean, you feel like at a point there's only so much you can do. But
Yeah.
meeting somebody like him really redefines that because he's just working so hard,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is cool.
Now, going back to your childhood, you mentioned some of the characters. Like, what were the characters that really impacted you, or the comic books? And then even beyond that, is there like a favorite artist that is like your top, or like a couple of them that you really looked up to, and that maybe you've kind of taken a little bit of what they did and added that to your own style?
Yeah, I mean, style is such a funny thing, right? Like it's
Yeah.
all in that cake. They're all ingredients. I don't know
Yep.
where one starts and
Good
one.
point. Yep.
It's actually it's funny. I mean, I think for one thing, I grew up on all those early X books. It was like 80s and 90s books, right? I
Yeah.
remember when I was like, I don't know, maybe third or fourth grade, I would ride my bike to the local market. It was like a 7-Eleven, but like a little family owned one. And they had a
Yeah.
little comic rack in there, which at that time was kind of common. I feel like that doesn't really exist anymore. But
Yeah.
I would just
Unfortunately.
sit there and pour over. I don't know why in the world they would let me do it. Honestly, like I look back and think they were so patient, but I would just read everything on the rack. Whatever they had, I would just sit there and read it all. And then I would typically pick up some X book or New Mutants or whatever it was at that time. And
Yeah.
so those artists, those early artists, it would be hard to deny that stuff, like John
Yeah.
Romita Jr. as an
Oh
example.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I feel like I might not think of his art first. I think of somebody who's a little flashier, maybe
Yeah.
like they came later, and
Yeah.
when I was kind of more focused on who are. You get to a point when you're an artist where you're like, who are my influences? That's interesting. And I
Yeah.
can see some stuff more clearly.
Yeah.
Um, but I look at it now and realize like that sense of volume and that sense of energy is so big. Somebody like that was a huge influence. But it's
Yeah.
that formative time when you're first reading something and first catching that connection. And I think I mean honestly, even related to Torrent, Rick Leonardi is one of those people. A lot of people will, and it's happened more than once, where somebody will say, your art style reminds me of Rick Leonardi, and I don't think
Mhm.
of him as so much as a big influence, and yet he's absolutely in there because I spent so much time looking at that art. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
bringing him on to do variant covers for Torrent was Rico's the one to introduce us. Was like, this
That's
is right,
cool.
because then you get this classic feel on these books that
Yeah.
you're kind of in a circle, right? I mean, in
Mhm.
terms of influence, which is pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
But yeah, I don't
awesome.
know. I love that early, all those superhero books from the 80s and 90s, and early in my mind may not be early to somebody who's older, but I just love that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's all relative, right? But I agree with you. I mean, I'm a couple years older than you, but I think we grew up on the same thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, X-Men, when Wolverine was first introduced, I lost my mind. That
Yeah.
character was so amazing. But then I remember growing up, and there must have been 6 or 7 Spider-Man titles out. You had Peter Parker,
Yeah.
amazing. What else? The Web of Spider-Man when that came out.
Yeah. That was Spider-Man. Yeah.
So there were just so many choices, and it was really only Spider-Man that was like that. Everything
Yeah.
else, you just had one title, and then Spider-Man, because it was so huge, it had like 6 or 7. And I remember I had to pick one. My mom's like, "You're not buying 7 comic books every time these come
Yeah.
out. So
For
which one do
sure.
you want?" And I went with Web of Spider-Man at the time just because it was new and I could start with number 1 and work my
Yep.
way up. And
Yep.
Amazing was already far out of reach by that time. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I
You felt
love
like you
that
were
time.
getting in on the ground floor of
Yeah,
like the
exactly.
thing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But I look at my art now, and I think the stuff when I started to really draw and think about drawing
Yeah.
professionally, I feel like that stuff shows really easy. Like Frank Miller,
Yeah.
Eduardo, those real contrast heavy, and then I guess if you boil them down, it's like that early Toth style where it's a little more
Yeah.
minimal, but it's real graphic looking.
Mm-hmm.
John Paul Leon. I just love those sensibilities, that real graphic style, and I think that probably rubbed off a lot. But that didn't
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
a bit later.
Yeah. Yeah. What about like a Mark Silvestri or
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
I mean, the thing is, like, is that in my art? Sometimes I see it. Or
Yeah, it
Eric
might not be in
Larson's
your
another
art, but
example.
was it something that kind of influenced you that you wanted to get into art maybe?
Oh man, loved it. I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, especially Silvestri, right? And Jim Lee. I mean, basically all those Image guys before they were Image guys and they were Marvel.
Yeah.
Marvel. Boy, I read that stuff religiously and I loved
Yeah.
it. And it was like that was my pinnacle of cool art. I just thought that stuff was so rad, and I
Yeah.
still do. In
Yeah.
fact, recently with Dan Green passed away, and it got we about a month earlier. I was sitting with a bunch of artists. We were chatting on the side, and we
Yeah.
started looking at Dan Green inks specifically on Silvestri, and then on other people too.
Yeah.
But he was just so talented. But his mark making made everything feel so dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And well, anyhow, I don't even know where I'm going with that. I just thought it was
Yeah.
incredible. I still think it's
Yeah.
incredible, and you see that group still making stuff to this day. It's pretty awesome.
Pretty amazing. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always think of Eric Larson still working on that same property now.
Yeah. Savage Dragon.
Dragon Comics. I mean, like that's the dream. If you can find that thing you really love that
Yeah.
much, where you're just working it out, man, it's incredible.
Yeah. I know Todd McFarlane broke the record for the longest running, I think, independent. But I think he might be second with Savage Dragon. He's got to be like in 280, maybe issue 280,
Yeah,
270 something. So he's right there.
yeah, you'd be duking it out, right? And with respect, I think Eric Larson's been doing the whole thing the whole time. It's not like he
That's incredible.
building teams to continue working on it, which
That's a good
with
point.
respect is totally awesome too.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, but he's been over there on that character that whole time, and
Yeah.
it seems like he's having a blast.
Yeah. I mean, he's like when you see all those guys, it seems like he is always very steady in his
Yeah,
demeanor, right? He seems like he's always in a good mood. He just enjoys life, at least the times that I've seen him and met him,
yeah,
which is pretty awesome. And, he's had that one book and he's given
yeah.
everything to that book. And I can't imagine doing everything. Like the
I can't
time that I'm
either.
like, how far in advance does he have to have comics made just in case he falls behind? Because that's a lot.
It's a lot, and not even just. I mean, from the practical side, you're totally right. But even
Yeah.
just creatively finding
Yeah.
inspiration in that same thing, and to his credit, in fact, one time years ago now, there was an Image Expo in San Francisco. One of the not wasn't the last one, but it's one of the last ones before they moved
Mm.
from Berkeley to Oregon. But there was a display, so they would do the Image Expo, and then there'd be like a little party at a nearby museum. Sometimes they would do some kind of small event afterwards, and at this particular showing, it was all Eric Larson Savage Dragon art, or a lot of it was. There was
Yeah.
a mix, but it was a big display of his art.
Mm.
And we got to chatting with him at the show, and he took us in the back, and he took out his portfolio and he started showing us all this stuff he's done. And like sometimes he'd be working on an issue and the pages are all double size. And sometimes he'd be working on it. And on this particular issue, I
Yeah.
just decided I was going to do this. And
Right.
it made me realize that like when you love the characters, you still have to find your inspiration. And he would
Yeah.
just find things that made it extra challenging for him
Yeah.
because I think artists need that. I think
Yeah.
the enemy of the artist is really complacency, right? When you feel like, oh, I get it, I know what I do. This is the thing I do. I do this, and it's no longer you're not searching yourself trying to find something or beat yourself competitively to be better. I
Yeah.
think that's when you see folks you stop paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I think so
Yeah.
long as you have your eyes on something, you want something, you're hungry. It really shows up in the art too. You know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. When you are drawing, what is the like? Is there a frustrating part of what you do, like the process?
It's like something extra challenging. I don't. I feel
Yeah,
like
maybe a little extra challenging, or just takes a lot of time to get through.
uh, I don't. I mean, every project has that challenge, and I guess
Yeah.
compositionally, when you're doing your breakdowns and looking at it, you know
Mm.
what stuff's going to be hard. It's usually just the pages that are more intricate or involved, like
Yeah.
crowd scenes. You know, most artists that tell you they hate crowd scenes, they hate drawing horses,
Yeah.
they hate drawing cars. I have those feelings to varying levels, but I
Yeah.
don't think any of it is a big deal anymore. And I think that just comes from doing enough of it. I don't love
Yeah.
to draw horses, but ultimately, you get a shorthand that you feel pretty confident in and you can do it. And these days,
Yeah.
man, you used to have to build all your cars from scratch using perspective, and
Yeah.
now you can kind of plug them in. You can use 3D models to help you save time, as long as the art
Sure.
doesn't feel different for that part
Yeah.
of it, and you're doing
Right.
it in the same style you do everything else. It'll look
Yeah.
uniform, but if it doesn't look uniform, I guess that's a problem.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see artists taking crazy shortcuts now. Man, there's so many books I see with folks just like taking photos, manipulating backgrounds to try and
Yeah.
save time.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I would rather have something that looks less perfect, but it's more personal than something that looks
Yeah.
like you just pasted it in so you could keep moving. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, on the opposite side of that, what's the favorite thing to draw? Like facial expressions, fight
Yeah.
scenes. Like, what is your favorite?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a project. I know it's not the answer you want, but it's definitely project to project. But like
Sure.
sometimes when you're comping something out, you just have this moment and you're like, man, the stuff that's most satisfying is when you hit it just exactly how
Yeah.
your heart felt like it should be. And sometimes that
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
Yeah.
People the art may look fine, but it's not quite what you intended. You just miss the mark a little bit and that makes you crazy. But when you
Yeah.
hit that thing just right, and for me, it's usually in the inking because I do really, I don't have a real photorealistic style to begin with, but when I'm doing my comps, I've gotten to a point now where I'll do another round of revision to where they're pretty tight.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost like layouts to the point when I go to pencil all the pieces are kind of in place. Like the
Yeah.
foundational stuff's all in place, so I don't have to think about the drawing as much as just kind of laying it out, making sure it's right, kind of double checking it. But
Yeah.
when I go to ink, for me, that's the fun. And so
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you can be loose and you can find ways to push it and pull it. And depending on the book, you might add texture or
Yeah.
there's so much you can do that is exciting or I
Mm-hmm.
just really enjoy it. And I still work traditionally, I think, for that reason.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I do work digitally if I need to, or if I'm going to color something or I'm
Mm-hmm.
making revisions maybe, but I don't find it satisfying personally to work digitally. And I think it's because, and this may just be from kind of generationally being just a little older, but I like to have something in my hand and I'm like, I made this thing. It just
Yeah.
feels good. It feels like I did something
Yeah. Yeah. No,
looking
I'm
at
with you
it.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm analyzing and thinking about, if you give me too many options to change it, I'm going to change it again and again. Whereas I
Yeah.
feel like it forces me to commit.
Yeah.
And that commitment is the same thing. It also drives me to be like, okay, I committed. Did I like it? Or did I
Yeah.
think maybe next time I'm going to try this? And I feel like
Yeah.
I'm slowly closing doors on what I don't like until you get to a point where you're like, I definitely like what I'm doing. And it gets better,
Yeah.
I think, every year, right? I mean, if you're being critical with yourself, hopefully most artists
Yeah.
are at least being objective with what they like and don't like.
For
The
sure.
goal is to continuously be improving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel that. I feel that mostly when I look at the stuff, I say, oh, this is better than the last thing I did. And the next thing is going to be even better because hopefully you're
Yeah.
inspired by what you're working on.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I would think that you would want to be better every time you're doing something. So,
Hopefully.
but you
Yeah,
got to be
hopefully I
humble, I
settle.
think, at the same time, right? There is a degree of humble that you need to be in order to recognize that you're getting better every single time. That means you have to
I
see
think so too. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think so too. And as an artist, like it's a crazy tightrock though. You have to be
yeah,
confident also, or else you'll never
yeah,
get anything done. You'll
yeah,
walk in circles thinking, what if I'm not up to this? Or what if there
yeah,
was a better way to do this? You can make yourself crazy doing that too. And so
yeah.
it's I think I don't know. It's a very difficult balance where you have to be honest with yourself enough
Hmm.
to find fault and still be
Yeah,
confident enough to want to continue to move forward. I don't know I mean, that is not something that is nurtured so much as just sort of happens.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I don't know an artist who doesn't deal with some version of that either.
For sure. Yeah, that idea of being a perfectionist, I think, could be really dangerous, right? Because you could spin your wheels on one page. I was interviewing a young man. His name's Robert Geronimo, and he writes a book called Blood Realm.
Oh,
And he's an artist first, but he does it all, right? Just like Eric does. And he said the only problem about doing it all is you have to fight that perfectionist. Like, this isn't quite right. I'm going to start over again. All of a sudden, right, you're on these timelines because you're still putting your work through a publisher and they need to have your book at a certain time. And he goes, I was fighting for a really long time of being on time with when they needed my work, because I would go back and redo a page because it didn't come out the way that I wanted it to. And he goes, that's the hardest thing about being really hard on yourself, is if you allow it to, you could go in circles for a very long time, and it could be the destruction of your career if you don't get that under control.
It can. And then on the other hand, if you just settle for everything you do because you go
That's
good
true.
enough, you're
Yeah.
gonna fail too. And there's a balance there. And
Yeah.
it's not a clear line. It's something
Mm-hmm.
that you kind of have to find for yourself.
Yeah.
I
So
find
really
in comics,
experience is the answer, probably, right? Just more and more
absolutely,
experience.
because you also know what's not gonna matter. Some things aren't just gonna they're just not gonna matter because they're not that critical. And but if you
Mm.
treat everything with the same level of critical eye, you're gonna be struggling a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like in comics, you usually there's like two camps. There's folks who are just really careful,
Mm-hmm.
and the work doesn't come out as often, but when the work comes out, it's incredible,
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then I tend to fall in the other camp where I'd rather just take a shot at it. And if it's
Mm-hmm.
not right, I'll do it again. I'll do it twice, but at least I know
Yeah.
I'll get better. And I just feel like that comes down to personal, like that's a behavioral thing. I mean, I couldn't justify one's not better than the other. It's just sort
Right.
of like you're built, how you're built.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I tend to just like to just jump in and
Yeah.
get in and start moving that ink around. And if it's not right, and I know it's not right, then I'll just redraw it. But at
Yeah.
least I'm not sitting still. I like to be moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, as far as moving forward after Torn, I know you're working on a few things, but
Mm-hmm.
can you share some of the things that you're currently working on that fans
Yeah.
could, look forward to in their comic book store?
Yeah, I'm work right now. The thing I'm drawing, Torrent is finished, and the trade just came out last week, so it's fresh.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because I did see a post about the trade coming, and I wasn't sure when it
Mhm.
was arriving. But
Yeah,
that's awesome. So if you haven't read it, that's a perfect way to get the whole story at once.
it is, and it's honestly it's a beautiful looking book. He's such a good designer. The book looks
Yeah,
incredible. Um, so right now we're drawing a sequel book to Army of Darkness Forever. It's the 30th anniversary return.
nice.
And Tony pitched this idea. I don't know. Are you in Army of Darkness? You ever watch that movie when you were
I
young?
have not, unfortunately, but I'm going to check it out after we're done with this.
It's wild. It's a wild movie. And
Yeah, I'm going to check it out.
they're all. It's like an evolution of those characters, right? Evil Dead,
Yeah,
Evil Dead 2, and Army of
yeah,
Darkness. The the story, I guess, it's more relevant if you know the story. But
yeah.
originally, there was an original ending to that story where Ash, he's trying to get back to his time in Army of Darkness. He's sent back into the past, and he's in medieval
Mm-hmm.
times, and he's fighting, demon knights, and all this stuff. And then he's trying to get back his own time, and so he uses this potion, and they're using the book to return.
Mm-hmm.
He's supposed to take like specifically 7 drops of this stuff, and he takes like 8 or 9, like he drips it in his mouth on accident or something. But he
Yeah,
goes to sleep. But when he wakes up in the future, like, and he's stuck in this post-apocalyptic future that looks awful, and it just ends with him just like, no, the ending of the book is he's just stuck, or the ending of the movie. And I guess the studio kicked it back. They're like, this ending is too depressing. Like
yeah,
you in the movie this way. We want to see him return and then do
yeah,
something cool at the end. And the studio ending was fine, but the original, like, that ending is pretty cool, and it kind of set up another story that
yeah,
never really happened. And so Tony said, what we should do? We should pick the story up with the Ash, the exact way that ending would have been, and sort
yeah.
of marry it to the other ending, and sort of make one tale out of it that weaves those together, that
Nice.
continues to tell Ash's story as to what happens in the future.
Yeah,
And I thought that was a pretty brilliant way into
sure.
that world again.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we've been cooking away on it. I have 4 issues done. I'm working on the 5th one right now, and
Is it a five part arc or
it's a 6 issue
a six
arc.
issue? Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I think the intention is to do 12 total. So I guess we'll
Okay.
see how things shake out. But I'm definitely on for the first 6. Like that part is settled.
Nice.
Yeah, it's awesome, and it's in. I think FOC just closed last week, so that book's coming in October. I forget the dates. I think it's mid to late October. I think it's mid October. I'll have to look it up,
Hmm.
but it's coming though.
And what publisher is that through?
Dynamite. I think they've done a
Oh,
bunch of them.
Dynamite. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then I have a horror book I'm working on, which I've never done horror either. My
Nice.
friend Landry Walker and I, we worked on Last Siege together. He came up with this really cool idea for a horror book that I just thought was totally awesome. And the thing, it's a thing I haven't done, but I feel like I understand really well. I think horror, the power of like horror stories really is in the timing and the way you build it and the tension you build into it. And I just love that challenge.
Yeah.
And that has not been announced yet, but it is
Okay.
coming in the middle of next year, probably May. It sounds like May is going to be.
Yeah.
Um,
And now, from an art standpoint, does drawing Army of Darkness, does that help at all prepare for a horror book or not really?
I
I
mean,
would
in
think
some
there'd be some
ways,
similarities from the darkness of the art, maybe.
yeah. I mean, there's some overlap, right? But
Yeah.
there's a sense of humor that I feel like Army of Darkness has that
Yeah.
makes me well suited for it in the sense that I love that sort of sense of humor. It's a little ridiculous. I mean, that's the fun of it. It's like guy with a
Yeah.
chainsaw hand fighting demons. I mean, it's wild, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's super fun to draw.
Yeah.
But the book we're working on, the horror thing, does not have that sense of humor. I mean, it is
Yeah.
really like a tough, and I have never really drawn anything that gross. Like it's a
Yeah.
lot of creepy stuff and a lot of gore. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I will return to that in a little while. I had already started that series, and I'll
Yeah.
return to finish it. But that will be the next thing that comes after that. And then I do have one other project. It's lined up, a graphic novel I'm going to work on afterwards, but it's far enough away. I should probably be a gentleman and keep it to myself. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have another project started for early next year that we're going to be kicking off, and I'm pretty excited about, with a publisher I've never worked with, but I really
Yeah.
respect and I'm excited to work with. So
Yeah.
it's cool. Things are good. I can't complain. Luckily, there's lots of interesting ideas floating around, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're continuously busy, and that's pretty amazing. I mean, that's I probably an amazing reflection of all your work and the history of that work too. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
I
You know,
think a
I
lot of
feel
people want to stay busy and they fight to stay busy. It seems like because of what you've been able to produce in your past, your future looks like it's pretty steady, which is awesome.
I think so. Hopefully, yeah. Thank you, man. You know, I mean, you never really know, right? You just hope that it is. But I remember finishing Resurrection and feeling like, okay, if I could just get, first you're just like, hopefully I can break in,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
you do get a book out, and you go, all right, hopefully I can get 2 books, and maybe I can do two. Then people can see I have a track record.
yeah, yeah,
And you're so focused on just proving yourself that feeling never goes. You always feel like the next thing could be the last one. You always have that fire under you.
yeah.
I don't know that feeling ever goes away. Honestly, I'll be curious.
Probably
I mean,
not. Yeah,
probably not. In the same way that hopefully that we're talking about, that strive to improve is always there too. Hopefully those things.
yeah.
I mean, it's a balance for sure, but
Hmm.
I don't know. That sensibility just never goes away. You always feel like I
Yeah.
want to
I think
continue.
that produces the grind, right? You're willing to grind things through, and you always want to be the very best at what you do because there is that sense like if I don't, it's a pretty competitive landscape, and so I want to
Very
stay.
competitive.
Yeah, I want to stay
Yeah.
at the top of my game because of that, right?
Yeah, and more competitive all the time. I feel like
Yeah,
those avenues are all changing and shifting around, and if you're not willing to adjust, you may be just left behind. So you got to be paying attention to what's going on. I think
yeah,
there's a lot. I think broadly speaking, and I say this with absolute love for comics, but there's a lot easier ways to draw for a living. I remember in art school, they were like, you could do book illustration, magazine, you go on
yeah,
animation, doing design work, and all that stuff is totally awesome.
yeah,
And at that time, this is like 2005, probably. Comics was in a different place. Like I feel like comics is a little more accessible now. It's a little more
hmm,
accepted broadly because
yeah,
of the movies and television connection. Makes it easier for people to relate to it or want to understand it or get involved in it. But at that time period, it was sort of like, you could do comics. It's the hardest work to get, and it doesn't pay
yeah,
very much, but
yeah,
it's out there if you want to try that. And I just felt
yeah,
like if you're gonna pursue your passions, pick the thing you really like the most. And if it doesn't
yeah,
work out, maybe you do one of the other ones. But you also don't stay with it unless you have that grind mentality too. Like you have to just love doing it.
yeah,
It's too much work. Otherwise it just feels like why am I bothering to work this hard? But
yeah,
if you really love it, you never have that sense. You just think like this is pretty awesome that I get to do this every day.
yeah, yeah. That's pretty awesome. Now I
Yeah,
understand you worked on Stumptown too, right?
yeah. In fact, when I took on the Fuse around that time, I think we started talking about working on Stumptown too. And for a while,
Yeah,
they were overlapping. It was a lot of work.
yeah.
I did things in a really different order than most people. I got my first work pretty early, but I had another job. I would work a produce job super early in the morning, and then I would come
Okay,
home and I would work on comics in the afternoon and evening. And
okay.
I had that pattern, that cycle for like a few years, and then
Mm,
around the time we started having kids, I felt like, look, if you're gonna really get serious about this, you either need to decide this is a hobby and just do it on the side and just
yeah,
slow down and really focus on your work, or you need to really commit and go all the way and go full time and do this thing.
Yeah.
And
That's a tough decision when you got a family, man.
yeah, it was a tough decision, and I look at it and think it's really crazy because I decided to wait until we had 2 kids to give that a shot.
Yeah.
Luckily it worked out, but
Yeah.
it could have not worked out too. And I guess I just would have done something else, whatever.
Hmm.
But at that time, I felt like, well, you know what I'll do? I'll take on 2 series at the same time, and if one doesn't work out, at least I have the other one. I felt like there was some security in that.
Yeah.
Although looking back, the pace was kind of insane. But I worked on Stumptown at the same time as the Fuse, and I would go back and forth like every 3 or 4 weeks. I would jump back from one to the other, and we just had a lot of lead time.
Yeah. And were
But it was
you
a crazy
involved on
time.
the TV show too?
Yeah, we were. I wasn't heavily involved,
Yeah. I thought
but
it said you were executive producer or something like
yeah,
that. I mean, that
we were.
seems like you're a little more than maybe not heavily, but that seems pretty close to heavily. Maybe the
Well,
title
no,
does, but
it is a trip for sure to
yeah.
think about that time period. And for me, that's a very specific time. And it's because that when you really make that jump,
Yeah.
it feels formative like the other stuff does. Every in your life, you have certain landmarks that you hit that you're like, you feel like, oh, now I'm doing something new.
Yeah.
And I remember late nights working, I'd be working on Stumptown. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning because the babies were down and I was working, and it just felt like, man, this is crazy. But you feel as if you're just working on this book. It's just Greg and the rest of the creative team, but like it's a very small group. And it feels
Yeah.
very personal. We're just making the story, and you're like, I wonder if people are going to read this thing. And then years later, suddenly it gets translated into a television show, and suddenly you can catch it on ABC, and you're just like, this is
Yeah.
surreal. The change in scope is so surreal.
Yeah.
And it was awesome, and it was cool to see it all come about. And fortunately for me, thankfully, Greg, as a real collaborator, said, when you come onto this book, I want you to treat it like it's yours, and I want you to be a part of it. And you'll, so long as you continue to work on it,
Yeah.
you can be a financial partner on it too. You're a true partner in the book, just like everybody else.
Hmm.
And so when the time came to adapt it, and that deal got made, we came along as part of the deal, which is pretty
That's
awesome.
cool, man. What a great
It was great.
experience, huh?
Yeah, just a trip, going down
Yeah.
there and watching that, and like the scale of it, going down and watching them put together an episode, and they're filming something that's kind of similar to what you drew.
Yeah.
There were 2 of you, and now you're down there with 60 people watching this thing get put together, and all
Yeah.
blocked off, and you're like, man, this is it. This really is a trip.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, when I read that, I'm like, wow, what a awesome experience to kind of throw in the middle of your
Yeah,
career, man, which is just amazing. I mean, I think not for everybody, right? But I know so many comic book creators that their goal and their dream is that they could create a story that's so good that one day it could be picked up as either a TV series or a
yeah,
movie or something like that. And it doesn't sound like that was your goal or anybody's goal, but then it gets picked up. And for you to get that experience, I mean, you got to be part of
yeah,
something that I think a lot of creators dream of, right?
yeah. It's awesome. You're right about that. Actually, in fact, that sense of prioritizing is totally
Mm-hmm.
accurate. My goal
Yeah.
is to make really cool comics, but if
Yeah.
they are so cool that somebody looks at that idea and goes, that would make a good something else, and then I feel like, go for it. That's awesome. I'd love to see that happen. I mean, you'll talk to a lot of comics folks who all have something that's been developed or is in development, and most of the time it just doesn't happen because it's
Yeah.
like comics, but on a much bigger financial scale. There's a lot of reasons why those decisions get made, and you don't have any control of it. And so you can only hope that the person you gave your idea to
Mm-hmm.
is true to the spirit of it and wants to make that thing as good as you hope it can be. But like, you
Yeah.
never know. And in the case of Stumptown, they actually did make something really true to that spirit, and it was good.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
had bad luck in the timing because COVID happened, and the show got a reversal, so it got a green light for second season, and then it didn't happen. But
Yeah.
I can't even believe it happened in the first place. It's like I don't know. It's a trip. It's a bummer when it happened, but I look back and think, wow, it's cool we even had any part of
Yeah.
this, and that it actually ended up being so great. And that in time we'll see what happens. And
Yeah.
you just never know. We have other stuff in development too, and like you watch it and you wait and see what's going to happen. And recently we had a project that they're finalizing right now, paperwork, and you just say to yourself, that would be awesome. It's not the
Yeah.
thing I intended to do, but if
Yeah.
somebody else does some cool version of it, that's
Yeah.
even better. It can only put a bigger audience into that comic as well.
Absolutely.
So it's
Absolutely.
kind of
Yeah.
a win-win in that way. And you just when those experiences do happen, it's just a trip because there are so many steps that have to happen to get to the point it actually gets made. It's crazy, totally
Yeah.
crazy.
That's amazing. I'm happy you had that experience. But one of my last questions, Justin, is before we got on, we were kind of talking about creator owned
Yeah,
Kickstarters, those type of things.
Yeah.
It seems like you're extremely busy, but will there be a day where maybe you do create something that you do everything, where you're the writer, the artist? Like, have you already thought about something that like you would like to do if you ever had a little bit of time and throw it out
Yeah.
there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the thing about comics that we're talking about, that drive. I mean, for every project you're working on, there's like three of them that you're not. Like you have
Yeah.
an idea that you've gotten to some point in development, and you
Hmm.
worked up some sketches, maybe you have finished pages, and you're like, I want to do this someday.
Yeah.
And I have probably 4 or 5 of those. A couple of them are getting close to. We'll start pitching them soon.
Yeah.
That I love. But in almost actually no, in all of those cases, I'm either co-writing or we developed it together from the
Yeah.
very beginning.
That's
But
awesome.
they're not. I'm not the only person on any of them. On all
Sure.
of them, we've partnered up. But in some cases, started with an idea. I had some type in cases that started idea that a writer friend had. But you know, I don't know where they like in all those cases. I don't know where they're going to end up yet.
Yeah.
Now, right now, we just work on making a good idea. When we're sure it's a developed good idea that we can kind of explain easily by having some samples, then we'll take them around and see what the best fit for it is. And
Yeah.
if we thought the best fit was Kickstarter or Zoop or one of these crowdfunded groups,
Yeah.
maybe that's the route it'll go. Like time will tell. But
Yeah.
also the way we talked about it, I find that it's a daunting prospect to run a Kickstarter. And fortunately, I mean, knock on wood, most
Yeah.
publishers are at least willing to look at whatever we have to show, because we do have a track record that you
You
can
have a
point
track
to.
record. Yeah. Yeah.
No, this is what I do. You know what I do. Hopefully,
Yeah.
here's a thing that we're working on. Does this appeal to you or not? And
Yeah. 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 It's
I
much better than a Kickstarter.
well, I don't know. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
the other thing is these days you can do the Kickstarter and still do that. I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
those roads are exclusive anymore, and so
That's
because they're
true.
not,
Good point. Good point.
that becomes a bigger draw. Like maybe we do that.
Yeah.
I just saw. I was looking at a Kickstarter recently that funded to like these big numbers,
Yeah.
and I know for sure that thing's going to be a book, probably an image in like a year.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No,
Makes me
there.
think like, man, smart move. You basically paid for all the production part, and now you'll just partner with a publisher to put it out. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's people with your type of experience that do go over to Kickstarter, and some of them are raising a half a million dollars for their book. So I mean, it could be extremely lucrative when you have a track record of producing stuff that you built your own fan base. So there is
Yeah.
always that opportunity.
Yeah, you never know. So I mean, I guess I wouldn't say no to
Yeah,
that idea. It's just not first. And honestly, I don't get super hung up on where
yeah,
things are going to end up at the point where we're just building it. We're just trying to like,
yeah,
it's like sketching or probably like writing. I always come back to music. It's like you're just kind of feeling it out, and as you find
yeah,
that,
yeah,
you're like, dang, this is cool. And then as it becomes something, you have a better sense for where that audience might be. Where
yeah.
that thing's going to fit, and it's different
Agree.
for every project. So we'll
Yeah.
see how things go.
I almost think if that is your goal, it could cloud your ability to be creative too, right? Because now your motive has changed. And as
Yeah.
opposed to just creating something unique that fans would love, all of a sudden you're thinking about, the success of it
Yeah.
before you even get to it. So yeah, I could see that could be work
Totally,
against you,
totally.
right?
I
Yeah.
see it with publishers sometimes. I see
Yeah.
publishers who are so clearly chasing media deals and movies and TV, and the
Yeah.
projects just feel like little blueprints. And
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
boring, honestly. I mean, like you're not getting a pure vision of something. If you're worried
Yeah.
about who's going to play this actor when you're drawing this book, I think
Yeah.
you've made a mistake. I think you're not being true to the spirit of the thing you're trying to sell.
Yeah. Such
The
a good
goal
point.
is to make cool stuff, and then hopefully, and then it's like it's just a series of steps. Make the cool
Hmm.
thing, find a place to bring it out, and then maybe
Yeah.
later something happens great. But I don't get hung up on that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Justin, I mean, is there anything else that you'd like to share, or anything that we maybe missed that you're kind of involved with that you wanted everybody to know, or did we cover most of it?
I think you did a good job. This is awesome, man.
Yeah,
It's nice talking to you. I think Torrent came out this week. Please check out the book. I'll absolutely love it.
yeah,
It's out through Image. Army of Darkness is coming out in October. If you like the
nice.
art and you like Tony is a fantastic writer. If you've ever been familiar with his projects, this is really true to his sense of humor and my own too. It's a very fun book. It's a very fun take on Army of Darkness.
Yeah,
It's very fun if you like lots of violence and heads getting cut off. And,
yeah, I enjoy
all the
that.
good stuff. Yeah, all
All
the
the
good
good
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah,
Well, Justin, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you making some time for me. I'm hoping that we could do this again down the future.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
man, I wish you the very best. Big fan of your work. And yeah, I agree. If you haven't read Torrent, you're making a mistake, man. It's such a good story, and the art is amazing.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it, man. It's good to meet you and good chat with you.
Yeah, yeah. Likewise. Have a great weekend, my friend.
All right, you too. Thanks, man.
All right. Talk soon.
Bye bye.